This is an 18th century book I found on eBay and was quite surprised that it was selling at such a cheap price. So obviously I put a bid in and it came through. The book really starts off by showing you a series of alphabets in something that I tend to refer to as a Proto English roundhand script, because the script hasn't really started to evolve into our idea of a slightly truer English roundhand, because it was really written with a small leftably cut quill. And we see lots of lines of text. So these kinds of books were generally referred to as copybooks, because people were meant to copy the phrases and the sentences that you see in the book so that they would approximate this hand. So in order to help them learn the script. Now you can see lots of different kinds of scripts in this book. And the paper's really old, and if you look around the edges, you'll see a sort of differential color marking. That's where the plate, for the copper plate, was sunk into the paper. And that's why, one of the reasons why English roundhand eventually became known as copper plate script. So we see lots of little sentences to write out, where you have a large initial or a large majuscule, coupled with smaller minuscules or lowercase letters. And this is just to really show you the use of whole arm movement and muscular movement. So when you are trying to write these letters, the majuscules, you're not really using your fingers, you're really using your arm to produce these letters. And then, of course, it gives you a sense of scale, that you could do a large initial with lots of smaller text for emphasis. And as we work through the book, you can see more and more of these phrases and how they work in relation to the majuscules and the minuscules, so that you get a sense of proportion. Some of the pages show you where there's a large word and then text written at a smaller size for emphasis. So it really gives you a sense of what copybooks look like. And of course, not only do you see Proto English roundhand, you also see this script also known as Italien, which is not English roundhand. This is an entirely different script in and of itself. Now, most of these books were used to help train clerks and people working in banking and shipping. So there are lots of billing, sort of ephemera, debts and invoices and promise of payment. And of course, if you look at these in detail, you'd see that the invoice was laid out in a very specific way. The really amazing thing about these kinds of books is you can also learn a lot about the numbers. Now, this is an 18th century book, so you can see in some of the bills of lading, the date is 1737. The book would probably have been written in the 1720s and engraved maybe a little later on, so that when it came out it was current, so that people could look at this and see that it was a contemporary copybook. There are lots of flourishes distributed throughout the book, and lots of different kinds of flourishes, which is really important to take a note of, because you can really get a sense of how flourishing was used and why it was used and where it was used. And there are some little bits of handwritten notes in the book, as opposed to the book being printed. And of course, you have these really wonderful fold-out sections, which are so dramatic and really quite exciting, because you're sort of expecting something a little smaller than A4, and as you're working your way through the book, you see this big fold-out thing that's nearly the size of 3 A4 portraits folded out. The great thing about these fold-out pages is, apart from the deckled edges, which makes it really exciting to handle, is you get a different sense of the types of the dimensions of papers that were used in the 18th century. And I think this is a really important consideration for those of us using this kind of material to write with, to try and emulate historical context. That, we could use different kinds of folio sizes, different types of paper sizes to help show a little bit of import in the work and its historical referencing. And of course, you then also have, there's a great page that looks at command of hands of French, Dutch, and you see some really beautiful zoomorphic flourishes. So these are essentially animals which are flourished to look like, an animal in flourishes. There's a great set of pages which looks at some monograms and different kinds of flourishes, flourishing patterns to practice, repetitive flourishes, and of course, that really wonderful M with trying to emulate some fraktur and how extensive fraktur flourishing can be. Of course, this also looks at some of the Dutch Flemish current schrift flourishing, which is really quite exceptional at this time. So then we come to larger words like multiplication and division, and it's great to see. Now you can see the letters a lot clearer. You can see the flourishes. You can see the interaction of the flourishes. And it's really interesting because you can really start to see differences in the structures of the letters, where, you come to the rule of three and you have these really amazing dollop serifs at the top. And you really get a sense of how the scale and the scope and the balance within the flourishing works. And it really does take a little bit of time to sort of sit here and study these flourishes and the structure and the especially when you're using zoomorphic decoration, how to get the internal balance inside of the space so that it looks like an animal. And then, of course, we come to a sort of set of tables and weights. And the book was obviously rebound because you'll probably notice as you're sort of going through it that some of the pages are not all facing the same direction, which means a fair deal of twisting and turning. There's a great section that says, let not small difference in, and we're looking at something called square text, which then moves into fraktur and obviously the fraktur flourishing that's really dominant on these pages. And then we see a fraktur alphabet with its attendant flourishes. And this is really something quite special, because you really start to understand how the pointed nib and the broad edge nib were used together. And this square text alphabet, sort of following on from the fraktur, where you have a full page of letter forms, is really quite interesting if you start to look at things like amount and popular. It's like a cross between a square fraktur and a French ronde. And again, you come back to a fraktur alphabet with a little bit of flourishing, very, very delicate offhand flourishes, not sort of too complicated around the letters, but then you have these blocks of texts, again, to give you a sense of what you're looking at and how to produce work at this kind of level. Now, the book also looks at some charter hands, which are these really tall, striking shapes. And these were meant to be used by the legal profession, so they were versed in reading it. And of course, there's also some Greek and Hebrew and numbers. And then the book ends with actually what's the cover. So it says, writing accounts and mathematics taught by William Richards in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. So and then at the back of the book, you see somebody actually trying to practice writing on it. So it's really quite an exciting book.